I was just reading this and I felt like, wow, I'm drowning in angst. Why are you like this, Cassandra Clare? Do you like to bathe in the tears of your readers? Hey friends! My name is Meygen and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today I am going to do a book review of Cassandra Clare's The Infernal Devices trilogy. And this is composed of 3 books. First being Clockwork Angel, next being Clockwork Prince, and finally we have Clockwork Princess. So these are rather old books, and if I do remember correctly, Clockwork Angel celebrated its 10th anniversary already last year. But I have to admit, these are classics. And if you are following me on Instagram, you would know that the Infernal Devices trilogy is my favorite trilogy from the Shadowhunter Chronicles so far. But I guess I am sort of reserving that judgment since I haven't finished The Eldest Curses, and The Last Hours still has the last book yet to come out. But yeah, if you do end up reading these books, I really hope you enjoy them as much as I do. So, on to the synopsis. The Infernal Devices trilogy follows Tessa Gray, or Tessa, as she travels to London to meet with her brother Nate after the death of their aunt. However, upon her arrival, she is captured by the Dark Sisters, who are a pair of warlocks with the intent to train Tessa on her dormant powers of shapeshifting. They manage to coerce her into cooperating by threatening to harm her brother. Throughout her stay with the Dark Sisters, she manages to learn that they are under the employ of the Magister, who intends to wed Tessa once she is fully trained with her powers. But before they reach that point, Tessa manages to escape with the help of Will, Jem, and the other Shadowhunters of the London Institute. Of course, the Magister isn't just gonna let her go that easily. So, these 3 books, we actually follow Tessa, Will, and Jem as they fight monsters, meet new friends, fall in love, discover traitors, and much more while unraveling the mystery and the motives of the Magister. So admittedly, this is a little bit vague, but I intend to keep it this way, well, at least for the first part of this review, which I would like to be spoiler-free. In the spoiler-free portion, I want to talk about 4 things. First being world building and writing, next being characters, third being the plot, and fourth being the romance. And after that, I'll give you a spoiler warning first, and it will be up to you if you want to proceed with watching this video. For the spoiler-y part, I will actually talk, I guess, about the favorite scenes that I have for each of these books, and I'll try my best to keep it a bit short. First of all, for world building and writing, I really think Cassandra Clare did a pretty great job in writing these books because prose-wise, they're really beautifully written. I like how she is able to write it in such a way that it's descriptive but not boring to read, and it also helps you visualize really well what exactly is going on with their world. I think this is especially helpful and necessary as this book series is actually set in Victorian London, which of course none of us have lived through Victorian London, and we really have to rely on our imagination and maybe some prior research or films in order to like visualize what it's like. But I think Cassandra Clare really did a good job in helping us visualize things. Another thing that you should note about the Infernal Devices trilogy is that it serves as a sort of prequel to the Mortal Instruments series. And the Mortal Instruments series is the first series that Cassandra Clare ever wrote under the Shadowhunter Chronicles. Even if it's a prequel though, I think that Cassandra Clare did a pretty decent job in actually explaining the whole premise of this world. Like, what are the Shadowhunters? What are these runes they keep drawing? What are these downworlders? Why are there warlocks and vampires and werewolves and whatnot? And demons? Why do Shadowhunters fight demons? And so on. If you want to start reading the Shadowhunter Chronicles, because of how easily and how wonderfully she described things, it would be good to start it either at the Mortal Instruments or the Infernal Devices. But one comment I guess that I can give about these books, I would compare the Mortal Instruments is to Leigh Bardugo's Shadow and Bone, and the Infernal Devices is to Leigh Bardugo's Six of Crows. What exactly do I mean by this? Well, I personally think the Infernal Devices and Six of Crows are widely regarded to be better written versus the other two, so versus Shadow and Bone and the Mortal Instruments. And both would be good entry points into the world. But the thing is, if you do end up reading the Infernal Devices first, or if you do end up reading Six of Crows first, you might, I guess, spoil yourself a little bit on some aspects of the Mortal Instruments and Shadow and Bone. So there's that. And also, sometimes it can set your standards pretty high so that you won't get to appreciate the Mortal Instruments and Shadow and Bone as much. So the second thing I wanted to talk about are the characters. And for that, I will start with our main character called Tessa Gray. So I really like Tessa. She is one of my favorite heroines in all of the YA books that I've ever read. And perhaps she's my favorite heroine so far from Cassandra Clare's The Shadowhunter Chronicles. I really appreciated that she's a bookworm. It's pretty cool to read about the main character who's also a bookworm. And in addition to that, I like, I guess, the level of balance within her. She's headstrong and she wants to be independent, but she can also be rather girly. And through all of that, she's not annoying. And I think I like her worldview and how she takes in all of the changes happening in her life in Stride. And yeah, I really appreciate reading about her. Next, I want to talk about, well, one of our first male protagonists, which is Will Herrendale. And my god, Will Herrendale is probably the definition of a literally dark hair YA bad boy, which is kind of to be expected as he's one of the first of the kind and kind of establishing in this genre. I feel bad for him though. I think one of the things I really liked about the second book in this series is how much depth they add to Will and how he behaves. And his backstory is quite frankly pretty heartbreaking for me. Third, we have Jem Carstairs. And unlike Will, who is a lot more of a mystery, Jem is, well, at the first book, you already know that he's literally a walking tragedy because of what happened to his parents before the series ever occurred and what's happening to him even during the first book of the series itself. I think the appeal with Jem though is that I guess he's one of those really, really, really nice guy, one of those really good gentlemen that you would appreciate reading about in a YA series. And yeah, I like being able to read about him. I also appreciated how Cassandra Clare developed a lot of the side characters, but she didn't make it feel rushed, if that makes sense. Even if there's so much going on with the plot, she manages to balance it out with character development for side characters like, say, Charlotte and Henry, who are running the Institute, or perhaps one of my favorite characters, which is Sophie, the surfing maid that they have within the Institute. And even those who actually come into the second and third book, so later in the trilogy, I think they're still given ample amount of time to grow. But I guess I will just name names once we actually go to the spoilery part of this. Third thing I wanted to talk about is the plot. I like the pacing of this plot, although I think it's understandably a little bit slower in the first book because you're kind of assuming that the reader doesn't know that much about the Shadowhunter world, and this is where all of the explanations and world building actually takes place. So I think that's pretty fair to actually have. What I also really like about the plot is that I think the villain is not your typical black and white villain who just wants to rule the world for the sake of ruling the world. I like being able to learn about the villain's motives throughout the book, and it adds actually a lot of mystery, and I like how everything is woven together and layered. Everything actually ties together pretty well. The things that you observe in book one, which you might dismiss as a clue, actually turns out to be a clue, and I guess the best way for you to actually experience that is for you to read it. There are certain scenes in this book that I really, really like, but then again, I will go in depth in them on the spoilery part of the review. But what I can comment is that I like how the romance is not something that sort of hinders the growth of the plot or the pacing. It actually comes together pretty well, and sometimes they actually use the romance as a pretty good plot device in sort of giving some of the characters more depth in their motivations. And I think the best example for this would be Jessamine Lovelace. And for that, you'll just have to read more about her. Finally, let's talk about the romance. Look, when it comes to YA books and romance, I really think it can either sort of make or break a story. In past cases, I've actually did not finish a book just because I found a romance too irritating. In other cases, though, I found like love triangles detracting a lot from the plot and the value of the book, simply because it's like it's not even really a choice. So okay, well, what usually happens is like you have a guy that's much more obviously better than the other guy in the love triangle, but the author just keeps pushing it, and I'm like, okay, this kind of feels like a waste of time and investment, but fine. Another thing that I've pretty much observed is that the guys are both trash, and I honestly think the girl would be a lot better off without both of them. But you're kind of more likely to root for one of them, maybe actually even the villain. Examples being the Darkling from Shadow and Bone, or Maven from like the Red Queen, simply because they're a lot more intriguing than the other guy who's just vanilla and bland as hell. And it's just boring to read, man. Like, why would I want to spend my time on this? But Cassandra Clare actually does a marvelous job at building both the characters of Will and Jem to the point that I really, really, really cannot decide who I would want better for Tessa. It was so mildly frustrating but also satisfying to read about, because I don't know, there's just so much angst. And admittedly, I did enjoy that. And I admittedly really, really like both boys. So yeah, let's just leave it at that. As for the romance for the other characters, though, I guess, and this is a complaint that I've heard from other previous reviews, my problem with that would be it seems like everyone was a bit too perfectly matched off in the end. And in real life, you don't usually end up with everyone matched up together and happily ever after, right? I think that detracted a bit from the story, but not too much. If there are any romances that I really did like, aside from the main love triangle between Will and Jem and Tessa, it would be the one that Sophie has with one of the other characters. And yeah, I feel like that romance actually was given enough depth and justice in order for it to actually be justified as endgame, if that makes sense. There you have it for the spoiler-free review. And perhaps one last thing to be able to motivate you into reading this is that you actually get to see these cast of characters again as parents in the Last Hours trilogy that Cassandra Clare has in progress. So for that, you already have the two first books out. So you have Chain of Gold and Chain of Fire. And I think Chain of Thorns is going to be coming out next year. And I will tell you that it's really, really satisfying to be able to read about these characters and they're all happy and they actually get their sort of happily ever after. And you can see it from the lenses of their kids. But again, don't read The Last Hours if you have not read the Infernal Devices yet, because you are going to spoil yourself like crazy. Anyway, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. And we will be starting with the spoilery part right now. Now that we're done with the spoiler-free portion of this book review, I'm going to discuss my 10 favorite scenes throughout the entire books. And admittedly, I can't rank them because it's really, really hard to choose which one is my favorite out of all of them. So I am just going to try to go through them chronologically. And the first scene that I have in mind is on the Clockwork Angel, the chapter called Blackfriars Bridge. So I really, really like this scene in the Clockwork Angel because it gives us a lot more perspective on Jem's point of view, because you can really admit that throughout the start of Clockwork Angel, it's Will that really grabs attention and gets a lot more screen time. So you kind of assume, or at least on my end, I assume that I already know relatively a lot about him versus Jem, and Jem is always shown with Will. And I just wanted to get Jem alone with Tessa first, and I think this chapter in particular was really satisfying. What I really like about this chapter is that it also gives us a lot more perspective on Jem's relationship with Will, particularly why he trusts Will so much, and also it gives you further perspective on what Jem has been through. My only regret about this scene is that I feel that it was cut too short, because then you have the Magister's clockwork creatures to actually attack them on the bridge and chase them back to the Institute. And I, throughout the entire time, I was just screaming, why? Why did you have to do this? Why did you have to just ruin the moment right now? And it's kind of sad, but then again, Cassie Clare does a lot to make up for this. So the second favorite scene that I have from this trilogy is from chapter 19, Bodicea. wherein we actually get Will's perspective and we actually see the tip of the iceberg of Will's suffering throughout the past 5 years before the series even started. So you actually get to unearth the mystery of Will and his predicament a lot more in Clockwork Prince, but this kind of gives us a glimpse on why he does all of it. And you also tend to feel bad for him because he really likes Tessa. But he can't act on it because he's afraid of hurting her because of the curse that is cast on him. Or at least he thought was cast on him. So there you have it for my favorite scenes in Clockwork Angel. For Clockwork Prince, well, this book is undeniably my favorite book in the series, which is probably an unpopular opinion since I know a lot more people like Clockwork Princess better. But here I have 5 favorite scenes. The first being, of course, Jem and Tessa's bedroom scene. So why do I like this? First of all, I think it was really positioned in the book very well, as it happened just after they pick up Will from the Ifrit's den when he was high on some warlock drugs. And it gives you a better perspective on what Jem is thinking through all of these. It was nice for me to be able to read it. It was very enjoyable for me to read it because you usually see Jem as this very calm, mild-mannered creature. But then for him, in this particular chapter, it's all passion and want, and I appreciate that, And also, admittedly, it was pretty hot, so not denying that. The next scene that I really enjoyed in Clockwork Prince was Tessa and Will's moonlit balcony scene at Benedict Lightwood's, demon party. So, I honestly didn't expect that to happen at that point when I first read the book a couple of years back. But, wow. Okay, wow. So, this is probably the most jaw-dropping, sexy scene that you have in the trilogy. I am so frustrated that they got interrupted, but also I was expecting it because they were in the middle of a party in enemy territory, for goodness sake. I have no more words for it except I was both very happy but also very frustrated with how it ended up. My third favorite scene in Clockwork Prince is when Will finds out that the curse he thought was on him for the past 5 years has all been a lie. So, I guess to give a little bit more context again for those people who can't recall the entire story already, Will actually mistakenly opens a Pyxis and sets free this demon called Marbas, who pretends to curse him, basically saying that whoever loves him will die. Now, he doesn't believe it at first, but then again, his eldest sister, Ella, ends up dying the next day. And this is what actually pushes him to suddenly leave his family and go to the London Institute to train up to be a Shadowhunter and distance himself from them. And that's a pretty big and hard decision to do as a 12-year-old. And that's very painful. And it's also very painful to find out that you did all of that for a lie. Now, in the past couple of chapters, he's been asking for Magnus' assistance in being able to find this demon. And then once he finally finds Marbas again, he learns this. That's just painful, And I guess I'm just really happy with the cliffhanger at the end of this book wherein Cecily, his younger sister, appears at the institute wanting to be trained as a Shadowhunter. Because I think it finally gives Will some well-deserved time to sort of reconnect with at least part of his family. My fourth most favorite scene in Clockwork Prince is actually rather short, but it's that of Jessamine Gray stuck in the Silent City, and then she tries to carve her initials into the wall of her cell using her diamond wedding ring. And then the diamond just snaps, and apparently even the diamond wasn't real. So Jessamine is one of those characters who was very, I guess, polarizing for me to read about in the series. On one hand, I really get where she's coming from and I pity her, but also I think she dug her own grave. Finally, my fifth most favorite scene in Clockwork Prince is the one at the end wherein Will is too late to get together with Tessa. So now Will has found out that the curse was actually a lie all along and he doesn't have to push Tessa away and he can actually try to win her over. But he can't do that because he's just a bit too late as Jem already proposed to Tessa just that morning. That was painful, honestly. And that was a bit frustrating to read. But also because I really liked Jem as well. I wasn't angry at him for proposing. Instead, I was just reading this and I felt like, wow, I'm drowning in angst. Why are you like this, Cassandra Clare? Do you like to bathe in the tears of your readers? I don't know. But it's really one of those most memorable scenes throughout the entire book series. And yeah, so that is it for my favorite scenes from Clockwork Prince. Finally, we have my 3 favorite scenes from Clockwork Princess. Admittedly, these are a lot Will and Jem centric, and I don't know, I just really like the emphasis and how things seem to end up full circle with the two of them. So, first scene I have here, that is one of my favorites, is in the prologue, if I remember correctly, wherein we see when Will first met Jem. Will likes to talk of Jem as his gravest sin, wherein he decides to befriend Jem only because he was already dying. And it was kind of sad to be able to read of Will as a 12-year-old meeting a 12-year-old Jem, but also really amusing because, like, even if they grow up and become 17-year-olds and so on throughout the entirety of the book series, they don't really change that much. The dynamic doesn't really change that much. And I like how Jem just doesn't take Will's BS. I appreciate that. The next favorite scene that I have in Clockwork Princess is when Will bids Jem goodbye. So okay, I admittedly cried a bit at this scene. This is the point wherein Tessa is kidnapped by the Magister's clockwork creatures, and Jem can't go after her simply because he's too weak already. He's dying because of the drug, and how Mortmain really has a sort of monopoly of it already, and that they can't get more. That was painful to read, for them to be saying farewell, and it was sort of an acceptance in Jem's part, wherein I think that's kind of where you realize that him and Tessa really are going to get to be able to marry, and that was disappointing and painful as hell. I am happy, however, that Will is able to rescue Tessa at that. And then finally, my last, the last of my favorite scenes throughout this entire book series is the epilogue. I think this is also one of the parts of the books that was kind of polarizing, but in the epilogue you get to read about how Will is at his deathbed and both Tessa and Jem are with him as he dies. Tessa not having aged that much given that she's a sort of hybrid warlock and therefore immortal, and Jem also being sort of immortal as he is a silent brother already at this point. Again, this sort of gives a great sense of things coming full circle, and I really appreciated that. And I like being able to sort of witness all of them one last time, or at least that was what I thought initially. And I'm very happy that we get to see a lot more of these characters in the last hours, even if they're the side characters now and their children actually take the stage. So yeah, there you have it. Those are my 10 most favorite scenes. Perhaps we have 2 honorary mentions, and they're not really scenes per se. More of I really just enjoyed unraveling their stories. First being Sophie's backstory, and I don't know, Sophie is the kind of character wherein I'm just truly proud of her, but I can't fully explain why. I just know that she's come so far from being employed as a parlor maid with an abusive family, and then she becomes a maid at the institute, and then eventually she's finally able to come through with her dream to become a shadowhunter, and I'm really happy for her, and I feel like she really deserves her happily ever after with Gideon. I enjoy reading about them together. I think they improve each other together. The last honorable mention of the sort is Tessa's history. So you really spend the first 2 books sort of puzzling out what exactly is Tessa, because I feel like there are a lot of hints that became a bit confusing. So you have Hyacinth, this fairy lady, telling Tessa that she was some sort of changeling, but not really. And then you have Aloysius Starkweather sort of recognizing Tessa, and then you have her shape-shifting ability and how she's branded as someone who's closest to a warlock. So maybe she has one demon parent, but also they're saying that you can't have children between a shadow hunter and a demon simply because the marks would end up killing the child. And I guess it was super fascinating to sort of finally puzzle through how exactly it happened, and how Tessa's mother was a changeling and she was actually the shadow hunter but without marks. and how Tessa's actual father was actually a shape-shifting demon. So yeah, that was satisfying to unravel, and I really liked sort of the conclusion for that mystery that we had even at the start of the first book. Anyway, so there you have it, my book review for the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Again, if you want to discuss anything, any comments, anything that you agree or disagree with, just please comment it down below. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye!